You're listening to KYRS Medical Lake Spokane on 88.1 and 92.3 FM, and this is KYRS Local News. I'm Megan Burton, and today we bring you a special report from KYRS Local News. Mitch Ryals, reporter for the Inlander, has been documenting the string of deaths in Spokane County Jail in the last 14 months. This week, another inmate was found unresponsive in her cell and later pronounced dead at the hospital. The count is up to 8 as of this week. Stay tuned for an interview with Ryals on the situation.
My name is Mitch Ryals. I'm Cops and Courts reporter for the Inlander, and I've been following the pretty recent spike in custody deaths in the Spokane County Jail over the past several months. It's an important topic to cover because a jail is supposed to be theoretically the safest place a person can be. That's the primary job of a jail or the jail guards, is to keep people safe, either waiting for trial or serving a sentence, and a death is an ultimate failure in that responsibility, right? And so it's an incredibly important issue to cover.
In the past 14 months, there have been, I think it's up to 7 deaths now. There's a handful in the 20 years before, something like that.
Right, yeah. So in the previous 20 years, I think there's been 17 total. That's kind of according to news reports and press releases that the sheriff's office has sent out. So yeah, 7 is a incredibly high number, especially for this short time span. The Bureau of Justice Statistics, the federal government puts out, or should be putting out, reports almost every year on the number of deaths inside jails. And the last report they released was in 2016, but it was using 2014 data. So the federal government started tracking how many people die in local jails in 2000. The best data I've seen, or that we have, goes from 2000 to 2014. When that report was released, the most recent one, suicide was the leading cause of deaths in jail for that time. Of the 14,700 people who died in jail from 2000 to 2014, 31% were by suicide.
So it's kind of a national issue.
It's a major problem, yes.
If a death occurs in a hospital, it doesn't count as an in-custody death?
Exactly, and that's kind of part of the statistics in Spokane when they get sent to the federal government, who tracks all the deaths in all the jails across the country, can be skewed a little bit in that the jail is only required to consider a death an in-custody death if the person is actually dead when they're taken out of the facility. So, for example, Patrick Flynn, who died in May of this year after he hanged himself in his cell, had a pulse when he left the facility and technically died in the hospital. So his death likely will not be recorded on the jail's tally.
And once again, it's a place where sometimes, they're in jail, they're safe. Like, at least they're not out on the street at risk of being beat up or using, and that hasn't been the case for these people, and wasn't
totally. And I've talked to parents or friends of people addicted to drugs, and they're trying to get these people help and to detox or treatment, and after trying and being unsuccessful, think that I'll just call the police, because then at least they'll be arrested, they'll be in jail, they'll be safe, they'll dry out, they'll detox in jail, and maybe then they'll have a shot when they're released. But that is faulty thinking, I guess. It's extremely distressing, not only if you're a member of the community and you see this happening, but also especially for the families of the people who died. And I'm thinking specifically about the family of Patrick Flynn, so his sister is a social worker, his other sister is a nurse who works in the jail, and as I reported a few months ago, gave him CPR when they pulled him out of the cell, and didn't recognize him as her brother. They had been estranged for a few years, but unbelievable. I can't imagine what she was going through, and is probably still going through. And Patrick's mother was a corrections officer in the Department of Corrections for the state, so he had people in his family surrounding him in helping professions who knew how to get him help, or that he needed help, and for all their trying, it didn't happen. And so that's very sad.
And it's been a variety of types of deaths. I know that there was at least 3 suicides, but there's been a couple other that appear to be, or as a result of someone going through withdrawals.
At least 3 of them were pretty obvious suicides, in that they found 3 of the men hanging in their cells by bed sheets. And the jail has actually tried to address that by removing the bed sheets and giving them an extra thicker blanket that other jails in Washington state have done that in an effort to address suicidal deaths. The most recent one is being investigated as a homicide. The circumstances, the limited information we have there is that the man was involved in some kind of a fist fight inside of a dormitory-style pod or cell. The fight stopped, and he then hit the emergency alert button and complained of trouble breathing, died in the facility shortly after medics and jail staff tried to save him. Shane Carson, which I think was my most recent article, I talked to his cellmate. He was booked into jail 10 hours before guards were trying to resuscitate him, and I believe he ultimately died inside the facility as well.
So you kind of talked about some of the things that they've done to kind of rectify that situation, such as the bed sheets. I know they're looking at getting some of the rescue hooks as well, and they're also bringing on Lindsay Hayes, I believe.
Shortly after Patrick Flynn's death, he was the third man to commit suicide, and I think before the death in June, the jail announced a list of reforms and efforts to mitigate this problem. The bed sheets being one. Lindsay Hayes, who's a nationally recognized expert in preventing in custody suicide deaths, is scheduled to come and kind of review the jail's policies and practices and, basically tell them how they can do it better. One, I think, kind of hold up in that process, at least, is that the detectives have completed interviews, but they're waiting on toxicology reports, and without knowing potentially what substances were in these people's systems, they can't draw definite conclusions, and so it's kind of hindering any kind of official review and therefore any changes that could come about, you know what I mean? So that's a frustration with the jail, and as I know, especially with the families, as they're kind of, their sons and daughter and boyfriend and family members have perished in this facility, and they're kind of just left without answers, waiting.
Yeah, it's hard to get that closure.
Yeah.
Despite some of these reforms that have been a little immediate, and I know some of them are taking a little while. Sheriff Ozzie has said that it's just an issue of overcrowding, and that they have had this money that was supposed to get another facility built or a better run or bigger facility, but that still hasn't happened. And
right. There's
just too many people and not enough staff to kind of make sure that everyone is safe.
Right. The jail staff kind of tells me at least one of the hang-ups in providing a certain type of medication that could help address symptoms of people going through opiate withdrawals are logistics, basically, where you need staff to kind of monitor them as they're taking the medicine, and that takes time, and I think they have to be monitored for a time afterwards. So they're kind of working through that and figuring that out. And when they first announced the reforms, they said it was the buprenorphine is that drug, and they said that they were going to start adding that to their plan in September, between when they announced the reforms and now it's almost September, and more people have died. But as far as Sheriff Knezovich's comments, he's been an advocate of building a new facility for a while, and that's been a discussion in Spokane, for a while. Some of the thinking on that is that if you build a bigger jail, it will just get full. You will hold more people, whereas we should be trying to not hold people in jail and have them either on an ankle monitor or under restrictions out in the community, because if they're in jail, they might lose their housing, their job, they're disconnected from their families. Not to mention, it's apparently extremely dangerous. People are dying, right? So the sheriff's argument is that the overcrowding itself makes it more dangerous, hinders the ability of officers, for example, to monitor people maybe like they should, and maybe to administer these drugs. He also says that in addition to a larger facility, the plan should be to build a area where people who are in crisis, like many of the people who died possibly of withdrawal symptoms or an overdose, can go. He calls it a crisis center or a community recovery center or something like that, where instead of just being thrown into the hard walls of a jail cell, they have more medical attention.
In your most recent coverage, you talked about NAFCare and how there may have been issues with other facilities that have contracted with that medical provider. And so what sort of medical, are they providing personnel or?
Yeah, so my understanding of the way that contract works is basically this company, I believe it's based in Alabama, they are required to staff and provide medical treatment for everyone in the jail. And part of the reason the county decided to contract with them is because they were having trouble hiring and retaining nurses and medical staff. Like, it's probably not surprisingly a difficult job to be a nurse in a jail, right? And so the idea was that NAFCARE has this kind of more national scope in recruiting, and NAFCARE as a corporation has been sued by families and maybe counties across the country, negligence possibly, or for in-custody deaths, essentially. For all the deaths seem to be related to drugs and withdrawing from drugs. Spokane is kind of on the front edge of that kind of treatment. I mean, they do offer methadone treatment, or at least continuity of methadone treatment. If you're booked into jail and you're in the regional health district's methadone treatment program, you can continue receiving that treatment when you're booked into jail, which is a good thing. They're adding buprenorphine, which is also a good thing. There are some facilities, especially in the more rural areas north of us, Ferry County, Stevens County, and Pend Oreille County specifically, I'm talking about, where physicians who are able to prescribe those drugs are very few and far between, and in fact completely absent from. I don't think Ferry County has anyone who's qualified to prescribe those things. Taking a step back from the specific situation in Spokane, another conversation going on across the state is how to treat people who come into jails either on drugs or withdrawing from drugs, and hope to publish an article that kind of digging into the situation as it is in Ferry County, Stevens County, and Pend Oreille County soon.
You've been listening to KYRS Local News at 6 a.m. and 4 p.m., and you just heard an interview with Inlander reporter Mitch Ryals on the recent deaths in Spokane County Jail. I'm Megan Burton. KYRS Local News receives support from the Smith Barbieri Progressive Fund, a charitable foundation. More information at smith-barbieri.com. KYRS Local News receives support from the Community Building Foundation, empowering local organizations to help our community experience justice, vibrancy, and sustainability. Our theme music is from bensound.com. To send us news tips or comment on our show, our email is news@kyrs.org.